In this video, I'm going to be breaking down what it's like to live in Atlanta versus what it's like to live in Los Angeles. And that's coming up right now. Hey everyone, welcome back to Living in Atlanta, the YouTube channel dedicated to helping you understand what it's like to live in Atlanta, Georgia. My name is Marc Brenner. I'm a realtor here in Atlanta, and if you're looking to buy a home in the Atlanta area, I would love to connect with you. All of my contact information is in the description below. Please feel free to reach out anytime. My team and I, the Living in Atlanta team, help folks relocate here from out of town all the time, and we absolutely love it. So if you're wondering what kind of neighborhood you should be in, or you just need any kind of help deciding where you want to live in Atlanta, please feel free to reach out to us anytime. Also, make sure you like and subscribe and tap that bell to be notified every time we put out new content. We put out multiple videos a week about what it's like to live in Atlanta, so make sure you subscribe. All right, so LA versus ATL, that's the topic today. This is a frequently searched topic in Google, so I thought it would be good to break down the differences in these two cities. Maybe you live in one and you're thinking of relocating to the other, or maybe you're somewhere else in the States and you're trying to choose between these two cities. There is a big difference between them, and I'm gonna try and help you understand what that is today. We're gonna look at a lot of statistics and cover everything from education, crime, economy, political views, climate. We're going to talk about it all. Now, quick disclaimer for you, I am admittedly completely biased. I've personally lived in Atlanta for over 10 years. I have not lived in LA, and though I have visited and enjoyed my time, I am an unbiased source of information for you today. But we are going to be looking at actual statistics that are unbiased, and we're going to be looking at some of my anecdotal experiences in Atlanta. So hopefully the mixture between statistics and stories helps you understand where you need to be. All right, first up, let's look at population. Who are the people living in these cities and how many of them are there? A quick Google search will turn up that Atlanta has a population of just under 500,000, while LA has a population just under 4 million. So quite a big difference there already. And the biggest factor to me is the density. I know that LA isn't particularly known for density like a New York is, but it's important to keep in mind Atlanta is definitely not dense. Atlanta is really known for its sprawl. There are walkable areas in Atlanta, but they aren't typically connected. So you have isolated pockets of walkable areas, and unfortunately our public transportation is woefully lacking. So while you probably do need to own a car in LA, you absolutely need to own a car in Atlanta. And while the Atlanta Beltline has somewhat addressed this issue here, Atlanta's heavy rail and bus system simply does not compare to the capacity in LA. So an important factor to keep in mind if you're not going to be able to own a car wherever you're moving to. Now, jumping back to the population, it's important for you to understand the difference between a city population and a metro population. I don't want you to get the sense that Atlanta is a tiny city by any stretch. If we look at the metro population for Atlanta, which includes a few regions outside of Fulton County, we see that the population here is around 6 million. And if we look at the LA metro area, we see the population is above 13 million. Another note on population that's interesting is the ratio from males to females. In LA, you have a female to male ratio of 50.5% to 49.5%, but in Atlanta, you have a female to male ratio of 51 to 49%. Now that may not seem like a lot, but it's actually a huge difference. In fact, Atlanta is known to have one of the highest ratios of women to men of any metropolitan area of a similar size. Also, if we're looking at population by age, we'll see that Atlanta is a slightly younger city than LA. There are far more millennials here, and I have to think that's at least in part to the crazy real estate prices in LA versus how affordable it is to own a home in Atlanta. Another fascinating population fact, 51.8% of the population in Atlanta is black, while only 8.6% of the population in LA is black. Also, 48.7% of the population in LA is Hispanic, while only 4.8% of the population in Atlanta is Hispanic. Another interesting fact with the population difference is that Atlanta has way more single folks than LA does. Single Single folks in Atlanta make up 70.8% of the population, compared to only 58.7% of the population in LA. So overall, if you're a single person looking for a female partner, your odds are going to be way better in Atlanta than in LA. All right, so you can see there are some pretty significant differences between these two cities when it comes to population, density, and public transportation. But what are the cost of living differences? Well, it's no surprise that Atlanta is significantly less expensive for cost of living than in LA. Overall, Atlanta is 38% less expensive to live in than LA. And most importantly, the cost of housing is 63% less than in Los Angeles. The average house in Atlanta will run you about $258,000, while the average house in LA will cost about $685,000. Now we can see that utilities do cost slightly more in Atlanta, but every other category is pretty much the same as LA. So if you are looking to buy a home, just keep in mind your dollar is going to stretch way further in Atlanta. And to me, this is one of the biggest pros of living in Atlanta, the cost of affordable housing. I talk about it all the time in my videos, but the fact that you can buy an affordable move-in ready home across all price points in Atlanta really sets it apart in my eyes from many other similar cities. And surprisingly enough, if we look at the median family income in these two cities, we see that the income is a little bit higher on average in Atlanta than it is LA. So you've got to think that people are really stretching their budgets for housing in LA. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, you've got to feel like you're living pretty comfortably if you're making the median income. Also, looking at taxes, both your sales tax and income tax is going to be slightly higher in LA. So it's just another category that your dollar is going to go further in Atlanta. All right, let's talk about weather. Now we all know Southern California is known for its nearly perfect weather. So if we take a look at weatherspark.com, we can see that in LA, the summers are warm, arid, and clear, while the winters are long, cool, wet, and partly cloudy. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, the summers here are hot and very muggy. The winters are short, cold, and wet. It gets a little hotter and way muggier in Atlanta in the summer, and it gets a little bit colder and wetter in Atlanta in the wintertime than in LA. A big difference here is the humidity, and to be honest, the humidity in Atlanta is pretty terrible. It gets absolutely stifling here in the warmer months, and obviously in LA, being closer to the ocean, you're not dealing with nearly that level of humidity. It does rain more in Atlanta and it is sunnier in LA, but we do have a lot of sunshine in Atlanta. Also, there's virtually no snowfall in LA, while each year in Atlanta we do get a couple days of light flurries and the occasional accumulation of snow. The biggest difference here is probably going to be change of seasons. In LA, it's a little bit less of a difference through the 4 seasons, while in Atlanta you do have 4 distinct seasons that are very different from one another. All right, let's get into the culture and vibe of LA versus Atlanta. This is going to be one of the biggest differences in between those two cities. Obviously, in LA, you very much have a see and be seen culture. You have a lot of beautiful people walking around LA looking to get connected with others and potentially make it big in Hollywood. You obviously have an incredible nightlife scene, plenty of clubs, and some of the best restaurants in the entire country. Of course, there are a ton of subcultures in LA, more than I could cover in this video, but overall I would say the vibe is a little on the materialistic side. Obviously liberal leaning, typically very open-minded, and very environmentally conscious. Now in Atlanta, you have a stark difference between inside the city and out in the suburbs of Georgia. While Atlanta itself is very diverse and liberal leaning and has a very strong representative LGBTQ community, we are definitely in the Bible Belt, so obviously religious and conservative views play more of a role outside of Atlanta. And so while it is very diverse in Atlanta, it can also feel very segregated here, to be honest. Groups of people sticking within their groups and not intermingling as much as you would hope, and like I'm guessing is probably the case in LA. Also, the restaurant scene in Atlanta is actually a big negative for me, especially when you compare it to LA. We have way too many restaurants in Atlanta that are simply beautiful spaces where you can pay $9 for a local beer and $15 for a hamburger and have terrible customer service. Now that's not to say there aren't some fantastic high-end restaurants in Atlanta, but overall the foodie scene here isn't that great, and I really don't think it can compare to LA. Overall though, one of the biggest differences between LA and Atlanta, I think, is that Atlanta feels very manageable. It doesn't feel like you're lost in a big city, a small fish in a big pond. It feels like you really can rise up and be successful here. Well, I've got to imagine it can feel very overwhelming in LA at times. It's a huge city with twice the amount of people, and so I'm sure it can feel challenging to chase your dreams there. All right, I want to make sure we cover some random differences that I think are important for you to consider. Number one, there is much less chance of you being affected by a natural disaster in Atlanta. Although we have had a stray tornado or two in our past, obviously we're not typically dealing with things like earthquakes or wildfires, which are very common to the LA area. Number two, future job growth in Atlanta is much higher than LA. We're talking 46.8% growth in Atlanta versus 36.4% growth in LA. In fact, there are over 16 Fortune 1000 companies headquartered in Atlanta. So if you're looking for an outstanding place to start your career, Atlanta is one of the best cities in the entire country to do so. Also, according to bestplaces.net, Atlanta ranks significantly higher for both violent crime and property crime. Though if you're used to city life, what I would say is a lot of it is just being wise. If you know where not to go, and if you know some basics around safety and living in the city, then I don't think you need to seriously be concerned about crime in Atlanta. Taking a look at education now, the student-teacher ratio is 72.3% higher in LA than in Atlanta, but interestingly enough, LA had 15% fewer residents who graduated high school compared to Atlanta. Gun laws in California are some of the most restrictive in the US, often requiring a safety certification and a written test. Semi-automatic weapons are not sold in California, and concealed carry is granted depending on where you live. Meanwhile, in Georgia, there is no permit, background check, or registration required when buying a firearm from a private individual. Open carry is legal with a license, and concealed carry is legal with a permit. All right, so let's talk about traffic. Obviously, we know these two cities have a terrible reputation for traffic, but in this case, LA really is in a category all its own. The average commute time in LA is 31 minutes compared to 26 minutes in Atlanta. I also found this to be interesting. Statistically, more people in Atlanta utilize public transportation than in LA, which is really surprising given how much better the public transportation system is in LA. I can tell you from experience with Atlanta traffic, it is terrible, and there are always accidents all over the place, but it can also be avoided. If you avoid certain spots at certain times, you can scoot around some degrees of the Atlanta traffic, where in LA it's really less avoidable and you're going to be spending significantly more time in traffic jams. The air quality is better in Atlanta, but the water quality is better in LA, but also healthcare costs are generally less expensive in Atlanta. All right, so I'll finish off just giving some of my personal thoughts on the difference between these two cities. And like I said at the top of the video, I'm an extremely biased source. I've lived in Atlanta for only 10 years and I've only visited LA on occasion. But if you're trying to choose between these two cities, here's my personal advice. If weather is the most important factor for you, if you need it to be sunny and 75 plus every day, if food culture, nightlife, and being near the beach are at the top of your priorities list, then you should probably move to LA. It really is one of a kind, and there's nowhere else like it in the world. It really is one of a kind, and I think for a certain kind of person, there is no substitute for living in Los Angeles. But if you're looking to start a career, if you're looking to buy a home, start a family, or move up the corporate ladder, I really don't think you can get better than Atlanta. The simple combination of how affordable the cost of living here is, combined with the diversity and strength of the economy, creates massive opportunities for folks starting a life in Atlanta. Add to that the great weather, the extremely low cost of living, the incredible things to do, the great nature opportunities that exist in Atlanta, and to me, this really is a no-brainer. Outside of having terrible public transportation, a lackluster restaurant scene, and terrible traffic, Atlanta pretty much does have it all. There are some cons cons, which I've talked about in my other videos, but to me, the pros far outweigh the cons here in Atlanta. But again, that is my completely biased opinion on that subject matter. All right, so there you have it, some major differences between living in Atlanta and living in Los Angeles. I hope you found this video helpful. Again, my name is Marc Brenner. I'm head of the Living in Atlanta team, and all we do is help people relocate to the Atlanta, Georgia area. So if you're looking to buy a home in Georgia, please feel free to reach out to us anytime. Our contact information is in the description below. We would love to hear from you. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and tap that bell to be notified every time we put out new videos. And until then, I'll see you next time.